One of the things that investors don't admit is that they don't expect people to meet milestones. They expect people to do good work and make progress towards them. So if you're really smart, your headline milestone is a bit of a stretch, but you've achieved something, so that you can articulate, we have achieved something.
Welcome to the Lab to Market Leadership Podcast. Too many advanced science and engineering companies fail to deliver their innovations from the lab to the market. We are on a mission to change that. My name is Chris Reichhelm, and I'm the founder and CEO of Deep Tech Leaders. Each week, we speak with some of the world's leading entrepreneurs, investors, corporates, and policymakers about what it takes to succeed on the lab to market journey. Join us. When I think about that early core team in a deep tech company, I typically think of commercial, technical, and scale-up and engineering. But the reality is that no team will get very far without really smart and capable finance leadership. And today, I am very fortunate to be joined by someone that I feel is one of the UK's best CFOs of an early stage lab to market company. His name is Michael Black. And what makes Michael special are two things, actually. Number one, he's worked across most of the deep tech domains that are around, including AI, energy storage, advanced materials, digital health, mobility. And he's also raised money at a variety of different stages, from seed, obviously through Series A and the growth stages, and he's even taken a company public on NASDAQ. So Michael has a lot that he can share with us about the role of CFO within a lab to market company. Let's hear what he has to say. I hope you enjoy. Right, Michael, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to have this discussion with you today.
Good, you're welcome.
I want to get right into it. To my mind, you were one of the rare CFOs that has covered almost the full spectrum of deep tech domains. So if we think about all the different, deep tech is made up of a number of different sectors. You've had coverage across a number of them. And so today I'm really interested in speaking with you about the nature of the role of CFO within a deep tech company, and in particular within a lab to market company. And to kind of get things started, I want to ask you up front, what are every role has certain parts to it, certain areas, if you will, or buckets.
Yeah.
To your mind, what are the different buckets that make up the CFO role within a lab to market company?
So, first I'll say it's the best job in the world. CFO of a tech company. Who would want to do anything different? And at the center is the fact that you are managing the finances. There's kind of a very strong hygiene factor, and in some ways it's a stronger hygiene factor than many other roles, because if you screw it up, the company's dead.
Yeah.
A lot of other roles, if you screw up, you can survive and recover, but when there's no money, you're really screwed. So the number one, it's very simple really, is to know how much is in the bank. And to know how much is going to be in the bank in next week, a few months' time, etc. And you just need to know that. And you don't need to overanalyze it, you just need to know it. And the kind of that's the key. And then you get on to the kind of managing the money and doing the accounts and the tax and all that sort of stuff, which just needs to be done. But where I've found it the most satisfying is when you're the sounding board and advisor to the CEO, the person who can challenge and advise, but also can then go and squirrel around into the organization and find out what's really going on, what needs to change. So it's not just the finances, it's everything. And there are people have discussions that a CFO who's really like a COO, and that's what I like to do. I've never
Yeah.
been called the COO. In fact, there have been some examples of a CFO being pushed sideways, and they get a new CFO who's more quote CFO-like.
Mm,
Um, I always tell CEOs, don't do that to me,
mm.
because I want to be the CEO, because I want CFO, because I want to, have that overview of the finances of the company and also how the company works. And it's
Yeah.
that breadth, that range, what makes it so interesting. In deep tech specifically, there's another bit that you add on, which is you've got to understand the tech.
Mm.
Um, and
To
I
what extent? To what level do you need to understand it?
the quite a fairly deep extent. I'll give you an example. This
Yeah.
real example. I worked for Cambridge Display Technology. It was a material science company doing materials for OLED displays, and we went public on Nasdaq. And I was sent round, on my own after the IPO to go do investor meetings, and I'd be, sitting there in front of an investor, and I realized that the guy had a PhD in chemistry. Understood the chemistry, the polymer chemistry that I was trying to explain as a finance guy far better and more deeply than I did. So how well you need to hold your own with the guy with the PhD, um, and you need to. I guess it's a trite thing to say about business. You need not to screw up.
Yeah.
You need to know
Yeah.
when to say I don't know. You need to talk to a techie guy,
Yeah.
and and when not to make things up. You get caught out.
Yeah.
And actually, for me personally, I'm going back to my childhood, is a very scientific house. I love the science as well.
Yeah.
Um, you also you get a crossover, I think,
Mhm.
between science and finance in kind of logical ways, ways of thinking. I mean, one company you'll be familiar with worked in battery technology and on battery materials,
Yep.
and we were designing nanoparticles of silicon with complex structures in it. Now, I can't tell you anything of any depth about the chemical reactions needed
Mm.
to create structures of silicon. What I
Mm.
could do is I learned what the features of the perfect product were,
Mm. Yeah.
and I was able to, talking to chemists and chemical engineers, to ask them what measurements do you make that tell you that this is a good product.
Yeah.
And then once I'd learned enough of that, I could tell what was a good product.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, one of the things I really enjoyed doing is I worked out what the perfect product was, and went back to, I
Interesting.
said, this is a perfect product. And one of the things, it actually caused ultimately a major change in direction. I worked out that the perfect product was totally uneconomic.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Oh, I remember. Yes.
no
Yes.
one had thought of that. I think,
Yeah.
no, this you've
Yeah.
got this perfect product which you can never make, and it's not economic.
Yeah. But it
And
sounds like there, you're taking you're not coming in to these roles as a technical expert. You've got to
no,
learn it. And so
yes,
you need to have that base for learning, that
yes,
propensity to ask the right questions,
hmm,
the ability to analyze and to dive deep and to, I guess, not be afraid to ask dumb questions, whatever dumb
yes,
questions are, and
yeah,
but to keep asking until you get an answer that makes sense even to you. Because if it
yes,
can't make sense to you, you've got to
yeah.
be able to simplify it a bit.
You've got to be
Um,
it's the communication part
it is,
is
yeah,
absolutely
it
key, because I've
is.
got to be able to communicate it to the PhD, and I've also
Yeah,
got to be able to communicate it to the guy who's not got a PhD, doesn't understand a thing about it.
yeah,
And it's that ability to work at those multiple levels, and to
yeah.
kind of read the audience.
As a headhunter, Michael, my view on the world tends to be a little simple, as you might imagine. And
Yeah.
I've in lab to market companies, I've tended to see that role of CFO is, a few buckets, I guess. One
Hmm.
of which is what you've talked about, what you started by talking about, that level of financial control, a
Hmm.
level of precision around questions to do with our current cash balance, our
Hmm.
future cash balance. Um, the second bucket, if you will, I suppose, is around the overall financing strategy. And I
Hmm.
know a lot of lab to market and deep tech companies worry a lot. How the hell are we going to finance this thing? We're
Yeah.
doing something that is so innovative. We're
Hmm.
trying to solve a really big problem. It's going to require potentially a lot of capital. In deep tech, it's invariably going to involve a lot of
Hmm.
capital. How the hell are we going to raise it? Where do we go? How do we get our story set? So I'll put that as the financing bucket. And
Yeah.
then the third bucket, if there is one, is kind of around the commercial piece too.
Yeah.
And that is around the what is our value proposition? What is our business model?
Hmm.
What are, we have to define unit economics, and eventually we have to have something called pricing because we have to charge people for what we're doing, and how we figure all that stuff out. Is that, is that the wrong definition to you, or do all those things fit into a definition of CFO for a deep tech company in your
They
mind?
they they absolutely do fit. I think
Mm,
the challenge is doing them in the right steps in the right order.
okay.
Um, I
Mm,
think so. Your early stage, you've just invented some technology. Um, Pricing probably is not going to be the thing you're going to be concerned about. You need a vision of how does this solve a problem which someone's going to pay money for. You
yeah.
need that vision to get you started.
Yeah.
But then your early stage, you've got to prove something. That's and the way I
Mm,
see um, a lot of these things, it's the way financing works. Is it works in steps to the next financing.
yes.
Um,
Yes.
and part of the role, a key role of the CFO is to say again, before the financing, it's how much, which is which should be based on what do I need to achieve, and of course should go without saying that if you're offered more, you say yes.
Mm.
Um, it does happen, and it happens, and people say no, and you shake your head. No, you always say yes.
Mm.
Um,
Always. There are no
Always.
conditions under which
No,
you might
I,
say, well, actually, no, we've got enough. We're good. It's going to push our valuation too high or whatever.
I think my view is what is anyone's share worth? My share as a manager or shareholder share, and it's X being the value of the company times Y% being your share, and people over-index on Y%, and the
Mm.
only thing you should index on is X. What will make this successful? I'll sort out my percentage later. Now you can get edge cases.
Sure.
You saw it in the bubble at the end of the last century when I spoke to a supposedly very successful entrepreneur, but all he'd done is he'd raised huge amounts of money on a huge valuation. The valuation had tanked, and then they sent the money back to the shareholders, and he'd become a millionaire. And that's a real edge case. A company had
Yeah.
achieved nothing, but the generally companies don't get criticized for raising too much
Yeah.
money. I have been criticized once by an investor who had um, remorse about having put in too much money and wanted some of it back.
Okay.
To which
Yeah.
to which the answer is no.
Yes.
No, sorry.
Yes.
And that company came
Yeah.
on to be very successful, to make good use of
Yeah.
that money. And there is a question of what do you do if you're failing?
Yeah.
Um, do you
Yeah.
stop at some point?
Exactly.
And there are again different people have different views. One of them
This-
being the never give up view, which I think I'm
yeah.
probably closer to.
Yeah. Is there a, I'm really interested in some of the questions you're raising here. I want to come on to them. The, for a, at the very early stage, when you're raising your seed round,
Mhm.
what, what needs to be in place?
The I, the first thing, in my opinion, is a vision,
Yeah.
some vision that you can articulate, and then the first idea of what you're going to do is to bring that closer to reality, so that
Yeah.
you don't need infrastructure, you need the minimum facility to do something to prove something.
Yeah.
That's
So you can have you can have a lab scale
yeah,
experiment at that time,
yeah,
hypothesis with some
yeah,
very early validation, a
yes,
vision, some
Yeah.
talent, very good communication, story, and you'll
Yeah.
be able to, your
Yeah.
chances of raising a
I
seed
think so.
round
And the
are
story, and
reasonable.
you should have also the story for the next step as well. You know, if
Oh,
I can
by the
prove
time
this,
of the seed round,
yes, I think you
yes,
should have the
yes, yes.
story. You should be saying, I want the money to prove this, and then I'm going to raise more money to prove the next thing.
Okay.
And for each
And
step,
you should have that goal in mind. You should
I
know
think you should.
roughly
Yeah,
what that
yeah,
milestone is going to be.
yes, absolutely. And you have to accept that you may have a plan for 4 steps into the future. Steps 3 and 4 are never going to happen because stuff will change. But um, I think it's very weak if the goal that you're intending to get to is unclear.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. 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 So
you have
for
to.
seed, you need that seed stage story, and you really need to have your milestones sorted out for Series A.
I
Let's
think so.
assume
Yeah.
that next
Yeah.
round is not another seed, but it's a Series
Yeah.
A.
Yes.
For Series A,
Yeah.
and I acknowledge that the kind of software milestones, Series A, Series B, Series C, don't always apply in deep tech because the capital requirements are different. The time to
Yeah.
market's much different.
Hmm.
The risk, the complexity, everything. But
Hmm.
for the point of you've raised a C,
Yeah.
you're now going to do an A.
Yeah.
Or you're going to do your second round. What
Yeah.
needs to be in place for that second round? Do you absolutely need to have hit that milestone?
You have to have a story. I think because I mean one of the things that investors don't um, admit is that they don't expect people to meet milestones. They they expect people to do good work and make progress um, towards them. So if you're really smart, your your headline milestone is a bit of a stretch, but you've achieved something, so that you can articulate we have achieved something, and it might not be uh, what we anticipated, and we've got nearer to this goal. When you articulate that we've got nearer
Yes.
to this goal, and I think in probably in no, I think certainly in Series A, one thing I think you need to start adding in is relationships out in the market.
Mhm.
The you can get away with, and maybe you should because you've got to focus, and it's a huge thing in mind. Focus. You've got to focus on proving something at that seed stage. At
Yes.
the When you're raising a little more, you've got to have a story, or actually the practice. This is where a founder becomes a really good founder who will become a CEO, and it's actually where I think academia is a good training ground, because what people love doing in academia is going out and talking to people. Um,
Really?
in Yes,
That's
the
I
my
think that's how, I
my
mean, is that
no my
contrarian?
no, my dad did this. My dad was an academic, and he loved going to the academic conferences and talk. That's what he did. That's how academia works. You
Yeah.
go out and talk, and then you get, if you're I mean, if it's anything that's with an industrial application, there'll be the industry partners there.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and so the smart academic founder will be using those opportunities to build the link. I mean, they have to. I mean, I have a chat with a colleague of mine at the moment who assures me that an academic training is actually a commercial training, because obtaining grants is just the same as revenue generating. Seriously, he genuinely believes it, and I find it quite moving. But there is
There may be
there's an
something.
element of something.
There may be a relationship there. Yeah.
There is something. So again, you're back to you
That's
seed
interesting.
versus series. If your academic founder
Yeah.
has built the beginnings of that industrial network during that
Yeah.
decade, they're in a much better position then.
Yeah.
Or I mean, they should beginning to have an inkling of here are the commercial relationships that are going to make this thing really fly
Yeah.
past the
I mean,
next stage.
you've been involved in a lot of financings. You've done very early stage, you've done
Hmm.
the growth stage, you've done IPO on
Hmm.
NASDAQ and so on. And
Yeah,
so you've seen an awful lot of, I'm guessing you've met a lot of investors along the
yeah,
way. And
yeah.
you is how is it really all about the story to them?
They tick lots of things. They've got uh, it's a lot about the CEO. I think they always, or without exception, other than well, maybe if you're in when you're in public market stage and there's public information, it's different. But so much is about the CEO, whether they're bought in to that CEO vision, that they've got someone who can make it happen, or if it's not going to happen, do something different that
Yeah.
will have which will have value. I mean, one of my most extraordinary investor meetings I ever went to was when the company was needing to pivot, and the CEO went to one of the investors. He just raised a load of money and said, I raised a load of money to do this. It's not going to work. So do you want it back? And quite extraordinary. And the investor said, tell me about your plan B. And we went through the plan B, and we got to the end of the meeting. He got out, and as he was leaving, he just kind of turned and said, of course I don't want the money back. I trust you. And then he left. So he'd invested in the technology, but he trusted the CEO to do the right thing if things went wrong.
To keep going.
To keep going. Yeah.
Wow.
And just said plan B didn't work either.
Yeah.
Plan C didn't work.
Yeah.
Plan D worked.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But if we're being really honest about the journey, especially with these lab to market companies, your approaches may not work. Your technology approach may stumble. Your scale up may not work. The economics may be all wrong, so we can't build a value proposition.
Yes.
All we can do is keep trying. And so what they're backing is a group of people that keep trying, that they trust to at some point get it right and to still be honest.
Yes. So one thing I can't chair of one of the company I was in said is don't underestimate the value of what you've learned in the things that haven't worked. I mean, I was once involved in a project. We were looking at doing business combinations, and we went to see a number of companies, and we realized how quickly we could evaluate these companies. We sit down with one, and they spend half an hour, they go through what they got. We'd ask a few questions, and we just know they had nothing. And then you go to another one, and you go, wow, you guys have got it. And you could try and keep a straight face.
You can just get that pattern recognition. You just had that pattern recognition.
And they have, and the ones who were still floundering around, you could see they were going to flounder for years, working out what the right questions are and what the right answers are. And we already knew. And
so, is there it comes down to the team then? A lot of it comes down to that, to the team. Who's on that team? Because you said the investor's really judging the CEO, but it's not just the CEO controlling the destiny here.
Yeah.
So to your mind, what else has to be in that package?
So there's the CFO, obviously, although, some companies do without for a while.
Yeah, they do.
Or have a very administrative kind of fractional CEO. A technical person, and sometimes that's the CEO founder thing, but I think you need a real technical person who is just focused on the tech, the CTO, and then a business development person. That's your core, and the right sort of business development person, because you can spend a lot of money on someone who can just sell. I mean, they can be utterly brilliant. But it only makes sense if they've got something to sell. You need that biz dev crossover person who is comfortable with nothing to sell, but working out what we might sell in the future.
Absolutely.
And then you will, if you get into production at some point and scale up, you need a production.
You need to think. You need to consider your scale up approach.
Yes,
and it's helpful to do that early too, so you don't burn a lot of effort.
Yeah, and one thing was a production manager who taught me was the danger of what he called premature optimization. And it was a lovely turn of phrase. And he was saying, I can, and we were building a pilot plant at the time. And he said, I can optimize for cost or I can optimize for flexibility. And I need to optimize for flexibility because you try and move fast. So you build before you know exactly what you need to be building. So you've got to build in flexibility. You've got to accept that it won't be an economic success standalone, but it will be a huge source of economic intelligence.
Yeah.
It'll tell you tell you what works.
And you can refine later on.
You can refine later on when you go up to the next. You go to the next size up, and
and that's a really nice segue onto so you mentioned the business development piece. You mentioned the nature of business development, and I couldn't agree with you more. Talk a little in your experience, where does when we start to build out commercial models, we have, we go from having novel tech, it can do something. We have repeatability, we have confidence that it can continue to do something. We need to figure out how to scale it.
Yeah.
But now we're starting to think, but let's say we have confidence on that too. And now we're starting to think, okay, we need to build a value proposition and a commercial model around this. Where does that start?
I think it starts very early. People should have an idea in mind, and I think and it depends on the tech. Sometimes it can be very straightforward. I've got there is a component in a system, and I'm going to make a better one, and I can measure how much better. I can measure the value. It kind of comes easy. Where it becomes more complicated is when you're really breaking new ground. I'm thinking, nuclear fusion, quantum computing, that sort of thing, where you're
it's a whole new paradigm,
whole new area. And I guess the experience I found fascinating in this regard was in OLED displays, which when I got involved was at that very early stage. And there were two aspects of this. There were you needed to build a whole ecosystem to build the OLED TVs, and then you needed to find your place in that ecosystem where you could, create something of value. And so you're trying to. It's great saying to investors, we're going to sell we're going to have a massive market share in this market with a total addressable market size of 0 right now. Because we first need to create the market and create the ecosystem, and then we can sell into it.
Yeah.
And then
because at that time, where OLEDs, there was no supply chain to support the development and the commercialization of it. Yeah.
Nothing.
So you've got that's a
Absolutely
long
nothing.
journey.
And we had to simultaneously help build ecosystem and also work out where we were going to play in that in the end. And we played on the whole ecosystem for a time, and then we deliberately withdrew and focused on where we felt the value was, and we changed our mind about where we thought the value was. And there was one of the debates, which I think may be less of a debate nowadays, is you go for manufacturing or licensing. And the answer's manufacturing. But you can go for, and this was learned from bitter experience, because people saw licensing as a tax. Unless for every product you're delivering something of value, they say, well, it's just a tax. We're doing all the work now. You just happened to file a patent 5 years ago. One of the best, if I say one of the best, the best strategy session I ever went to was, and it was actually a board really being a board, and we said we're going to have a blank sheet of paper. We're going to talk about how we're going to make money in this company. This is the company was 15 years old, and we were going to talk about how we're going to make money. And I remember one of the directors, very well known venture capitalist, and he said, we need to understand this value chain. He drew it on the board. He drew the value chain and all of how you got from, buying raw material chemicals right up to producing an OLED TV. And he made us go through every point in the value chain and say, can we participate in there? Can we make money there? And we ended up saying that's where we need to make money. And the reason it was so extraordinary as a strategy session is when we got back to the office the next day, the strategy changed and we did things differently. We actually had a strategy session where we decided on a strategy and then we did it. And it was a reevaluation of what's the business model, where do you make, and you have to be prepared to to change.
How much did you get involved in that as a CFO?
It was, I think it might even have been, I was very early days CFO. Actually, I didn't get very much involved in it. And the reason is I was too inexperienced.
Okay.
It was a classic case of look and learn. And which is interesting when you all know this in recruitment. When you're hiring, how much do you hire the full rounded experienced person, and what extent do you go for someone
with potential?
With potential, I guess part of that, I think, is is there a core of what they can do that everyone will accept is valuable, and they'll happily wait for the rest. So in that strategy session,
absolutely,
I didn't have much to say about where we should participate in the value chain. I had lots to say about other things that people.
But I know for a fact that you've been very involved in other companies.
Yes. Oh, yes. And I've learned a bit since then. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how far typically would you expect a CFO to get involved in figuring out, or even in hosting that kind of discussion?
You get very involved, obviously. You can host. I prefer not to be the one hosting the discussion. I think this is where a CEO can really lead. In this, this is the core of how we're going to make the business successful, and the CEO should lead that. And the role of the CEO or CFO is to participate and bring an analytical viewpoint to do things. The other key role, I think, is being the person who can call out the elephant in the room. Calling out when something just isn't working.
Yeah. When
everyone's doing something because that's what they do. I remember a discussion with a CTO about a project that we were putting a lot of resources on, and I was questioning him about this. And where we ended was him admitting that this project had no chance whatsoever of being successful. Why are you continuing to do this? And the answer was he didn't have any other ideas. And
you're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. It was, we're doing this because I haven't got any other ideas. And the answer was, well, we've got to stop and we've got to come up with new ideas. And I'm fortunate. I've never had an alcohol problem, but my understanding is and I use this, I'm sure it's politically incorrect. I say to him, the first thing to do is to sit down and say, I'm an alcoholic. Then you can start working out what to do.
What the problem? Yeah, exactly.
If you don't admit it, you
got to acknowledge
people,
first of all. Yeah.
People revert to comfort zones, and we'll just carry on doing this little experiment and make this thing work a little better, but we know it's useless. And people do that, and I know people do it. I think because in something a CFO can help with, I think, is clarity of goals within a business.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and 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 it's like maybe people think, what a CFO will want to bring is a nice complicated page with lots of numbers.
Mm.
I'm up for a goal that you can write down in less than 10 words.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and the fewer objectives, the better. It links back to our discussion on financing. Can you
Yeah.
very clearly articulate, by this date, we're going to achieve this
Yes.
goal? And then when you talk to everyone in the business, is what you're doing making that goal closer to reality? And if the answer
Yeah.
is no, we need to stop um,
Yes.
and work out what to
And
do.
work out another way of
Work out
achieving
another
it.
way. And often the CFO can't work out what the other way is. But another experience of mine is when following these sorts of discussions, the CEO says, we just need to think through another way. And he called the CTO in, went into his office, shut the door, and said, "Don't disturb me." And 2 days later, they came out and said, "This is what we're going to do." And in between time, I'd say, "How are you doing?" He'd say, "We're in the middle of it. Ask me when we're done." And comes out with this. So, I couldn't really have helped with the discussion, but I feel that I helped make sure the discussion happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then,
That's a great point. That's a
and
great
the,
point. It's a great way of looking at it. The financing for those lab to market companies where you've got to scale up, you've got to build a plant, you've got to, and scaling up a plant can cost 25, 55, 60, even more.
yeah.
Millions of pounds. What thoughts do you have on how to do that? Lots of people are talking about how to finance first of a kinds. Do you have any views on that, based on what you've seen?
The So I guess at that scale, it can't really be a first of a kind. It can be a first of a kind at that size.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
you you
Or the
you
first of a kind, it's a proper commercial scale. This
probably
is
it's proper. It's
broadly
a
what it's
first of a
going to
kind,
look like.
proper commercial scale. And I think
Yeah.
the issue you get into is the economics and the returns. That you're no longer at VC. I'm going to get 10x my money. Um, and you have to convince um, uh, more traditional investors that this is a thing.
Like
This
who?
this, this is
What
this
kind of
is
more traditional investors?
and I'm not going to name because you're aware, and I'll be very honest. This specific area is not my
Okay. Yeah.
personal experience. So some of
Yep.
this is secondhand, but I've seen others do it.
Yes. Yep.
Um, do it, and they've gone to banks even,
Yeah. Yeah.
and said, uh, where it's difficult is growth stage investors who want to see evidence of you're actually looking at who wants the evidence of commercial traction, or no, they want to see evidence of revenue growth off stage investors. And obviously,
Yes.
if you're building your first scale plan, you actually want to get infrastructure
Yeah.
investors who see this as low risk when of course it isn't. And
Yes.
so you're going to get the edge of the risky edge of an infrastructure investor.
Yeah.
And you know for me, there is one thing you can do to enable that, and that's to have a customer.
Yeah.
A customer who has um, signed a contract. Now, all of these contracts will be, I won't say not worth the paper they're written. There'll be a kind of uh, beautiful letters of intent called contracts.
Yeah.
If you like, if this happens, we might do this sort of thing. But something that looks like a contract that says when you build it,
We will come.
we will come.
Yeah.
We will buy the stuff. And the reason we'll buy the stuff is what came out of your pilot plant. We've proved it works.
Yeah.
And they will. I have discussions with people. This is in many different businesses. And they ask about what evidence of commercial traction do investors want to see. And I always say, my opinion, what the most valuable thing is that you have a senior executive in a customer who will take a call from an investor and will say, this is great, and I want to buy it, and I want to buy it as soon as possible. And that's as valuable as the contracts that
as a customer, contract, as a real contract. Yeah,
and it's real, and it's a customer that people have heard of.
Yes.
I once went to a launch event for a rocket company, and I certainly at the event I sat next to this guy, and he said, "I'm the lead customer." He said he's very proud of himself, and it was another startup. So it was a rocket company with no money, and their lead customer was a startup with no money, and that doesn't quite
not the same.
That doesn't quite do it. But a household name that is going to put this in a mainstream product at scale.
And in your experience, Michael, from your experience, how long has it taken to attract a mainstream customer?
Years. I think in deep tech years, and you have to start. I mean, if you go to Japan or Korea, especially years, because and this is actually, I think this is a very positive part of that business culture, that they really want to get to know you and your technology and how well you do things. And then every year it gets a little bit deeper. And there are milestones, they're not written down, but when they send over the team of quality engineers, you're making progress. And it's that's not something that's written down anywhere, but those are the sort of
those are the rules.
Those are the rules. Yeah, those are the rules. You have to, and again, I think this is something that's maybe difficult for founders, is the extent to which those customers will dictate what you do. It was certainly something that I had to learn in business. If I want to make someone for a large company, they're kind of going to want to tell me how to make it. They're going to be all over my plant. I'm not building my plant and the output comes out and I say, there you go, do you like it?
Unless they've had input into that.
They want to know, how do you manage your supply chain? How do you maintain your equipment? How do you train your staff? All this. And at the end of the day, because they don't want a product. They don't have to test the product knowing that they might have to reject it, because a rejected product is a disaster for them. Yeah. They have to be absolutely certain that what comes out will meet their specifications that they have set, that they have developed with you. This actually really helps with product development as well, because if you develop a relationship with a customer who you basically get them on the hook because they're interested, they then help you make the product better. Yeah. Especially if it's a component in a larger system, because I mean, one of the hardest areas I've spent some time in is batteries. And the reason it's so difficult is to make a good battery is really hard. Yeah. And if you're making a material for a battery, you're not an expert in making batteries. You need to get that into the hands of an expert at making battery who can tell you if it's really good. And they'll give you some hints. If you measure these things, then you're likely to have a good product. But I mean, it's quite an interesting position, because you're in a position that you can't prove that your product is good enough because you don't have the expertise. Yeah. You rely on someone else to say, yes, this will.
And I was speaking with Peter Collins, another entrepreneur, and he was talking about how he did this with BP, and the line you need to draw between making it to their spec, to their design, something they're going to want, but also making sure you can have other customers too, and that you don't just become a delivery shop for products that big company needs.
And I mean, that's clearly the case.
Yeah.
That's true. And how do you avoid it? Um, I think I don't have an easy answer.
Yeah.
Part of the
Yeah.
answer is that you, and this is hard for a small company, but I think important, is that you have a network of trusted advisors who can help you through that.
Mm.
Because it's difficult to do. Because especially if you're, I mean, I'm a great proponent of focus. You need to focus on that customer, and you need trusted advisors to question you on those types of things, and you need wise counsel on what time do you open up a second front
Mm.
with another customer, knowing that that will cause distraction.
Where do those advisors sit?
They are well, personally, I think they should sit on your board, and I think your board should be you should have a nice set of non-executives who really know your industry,
Mm.
your technology, and one investor.
Mm.
Um,
Only one?
only one. And and I'll tell you why only one. Because for a board to be successful, it needs a diversity of expertise.
It does.
And if you have, and each investor has expertise, and they all have relevant expertise, and they all have a contribution.
Mm.
So you should have one of them.
Mm.
But there is high value for that first investor, less value for the second one, even less than the third one. And if you end up having a fourth, then you haven't got 4x the value, you've got kind of 1.5x the value.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and the
But
trouble
that's
is,
not popular. That's really not popular over here, Michael.
no,
I mean, every investor who invests in a company demands a seat on the board typically.
yes, and they think it helps them, and it doesn't. I mean, and it kind of leads me to say, well, you want to, and I've seen companies do this. They sideline their board, and they set up an advisory board where they get the actual advice.
Yeah.
But yes, having 3, 4 and the funny thing is, you can't say, oh, that one isn't adding value, because they're all adding value.
Yeah.
It's just not sufficiently diverse. And that's what you're missing.
What are the biggest, if you look back at your career in startups, you've had one heck of a career in startups. What are the big juicy lessons for you that you'd want to communicate to that next generation of executive coming in to do battle?
So one of them is that it is never too soon to fix something. I have never been in a situation who fixed something or changed something and said, I'm glad I waited to do that. Every time you say, I wish I'd done it sooner. People are concerned about making precipitate decisions, but people rarely do. So, when you know it's wrong, go change it. And there's a good test that I have for this. I learned this from my children, actually. And one of my kids was having trouble at school, and every night we'd have a good moan, me and my wife, about the problems at school. And this went on for months and months and months and months and months. And eventually we said, we're moving the kid to a different school. And we moved into a different school. And overnight, the problem was gone. And we thought, why have we spent months every night having a good moan about this? And I use this now at work. If there's something you keep coming back to, you keep discussing it. It can be an individual, it can be a project, it can be a way of working, and it just keeps coming back. You've got to say, stop, there's something wrong, and we need to fix it now. And we need to do something radical because we keep talking about it. It's a great,
great lesson for life. That's a great lesson for life.
It is.
Wow.
It's good. I guess another one is that, and it links to one of the things I said earlier, that continuing to do something is a decision. People think that continuing is not a decision. No, it is a decision if you continue to do something. And if it's and I've never got as far as this, but you often, when you have a decision-making meeting, you're discussing whether to make a change.
Mm.
And it's quite interesting. I've only just had this thought, which surprises me. I'm too old for this. That actually you should approach meetings where continuing along the path has the same status as making a change. I'm going to start using that.
That's really good.
That's
really good. And I can see, especially in those early days when you're trying to figure it all out.
Yeah.
What approach, what value proposition, what is our offering? Is it all going to work? Where I guess you have to evaluate that constantly.
And this is where
and staying the course then is then we have confidence in our approach. We're staying the course. Yeah. That's a decision.
And the simpler you can make your goals and focus, the better, even if they're the wrong ones, bizarrely. So one of the things I think destroys progress is when you have disagreement, you come to a decision, and you all pretend that you're all going down one path, except there's a whole load of passive resistance. And then you end up achieving nothing. But in fact, even if you disagree with something, you should embrace going down the wrong path. Absolutely. And do everything you can to make the wrong path successful. And part of the reason you do that, even if you don't believe in it, is you'll get to the wrong place faster.
Yeah.
And then you can stop and go back.
So that's a big emotional exercise that you and your team have to go through then.
Yeah.
You just have to embrace that discomfort. Shit, I don't want to do this. This isn't what I wanted to do, but okay, we're doing it. So
it's you're sitting at the crossroads.
Yeah.
The worst thing to do is continue sitting at the crossroads. Go the wrong way and be prepared to come back and take the right route. But if you sit there, you'll make no progress.
Yeah. That's great.
And and then learn from it. You have to be open to yourselves then if things gone wrong. And the other thing you have to be very careful about is if you're a dissenter, not to then be the "I told you so" person.
Yeah.
Because then you start destroying trust.
There's a whole load of emotion. There's a whole load of emotional development that needs to go on in members of the executive teams in order to be able to handle these kinds of pressures and to be able to move at the pace that's required. And it's like no one ever talks about that. I don't know, maybe they do, but I'm not listening. Maybe it's somewhere else. But it's just, these kinds of challenges that you're bringing up are all have to do with the emotional maturity of an individual and their ability to control themselves, to get themselves into that new position, and to and then to do that as a whole unit, as a whole team.
Yeah. And I have an unfair advantage that I'm older than most of my colleagues, which is some real benefits. These things are much easier if you're in the latter stages of your career. So you can forget, personal advancement or or the next role or promotion or anything. That kind of doesn't matter so much anymore. What I say to you is, I just want to be part of something that's successful. I want to be part of something I can look back and say, wow, that was great. And I try and share that with people because it's a way that gets people emotionally there to say that achieving that goal is just on a higher level than the lower level issues that people get upset about on a day-to-day basis. It's very difficult to disconnect from one of the techniques I use, and I suggest to people, is try and think forward 6 months and look back to this discussion. And how will you regard it in 6 months? Will you regard it so important and so critical? Or will it be just something that happened? Try and put things in perspective. In that way. But people need to get emotional. You then get creative. It shows you. It also shows to people that you're you're seeking to lead.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I've been in the unfortunate situation more times than I'd have liked to be involved in downsizing
Mm.
and redundancy. And part of what you have to do is stand up in front of people and um, recognize the pain this causes.
Yeah.
Um, and the and it and getting a bit deep for an accountant, the fact that your job in our culture is part of your identity. It's and on the extreme you lose your job, but also it's so much part of you, your job and career. If it gets disrupted and changed, um, or you don't get your way, or your responsibilities are going to be doing this is hard because it's
Mm.
part of who you are and your self-respect. And I guess people just have to recognize that. I think there's also, and we should spend a long time on this, is the area of big company culture versus small
Mm.
company culture, and one of the great things about a smaller company is that you have flexibility. You can change it. You can
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
down different paths. You're not a slave to a whole load of process
Yeah.
procedure. On the other hand, a lot of people find this very discomforting
Yeah.
because they talk about all the change that keeps happening.
Yeah.
And to
Yes.
actually get people in a culture where all the change that keeps happening is actually fine. It's just how we do it.
It's how things have to be done
How things have
in
to be
order.
done,
It's how things have to be done. Yeah.
but you have to explain it.
Yeah.
You have to and bring people along. Otherwise, it gets you can have people on the coal face doing the real work who feel they're
Yeah.
just being pushed from side to side all the time.
Yeah.
And it's one of the one of the things you asked about things I've learned is that when you get a little bit larger as a company, it is very easy to have a disconnect between the management and the people um, doing a lot of the work, and you start putting in place this middle layer, and you as managers you think that the middle layer is helping you manage the company, but if you don't do that right, the middle layer is just sitting there insulating you from all the problems down below, because they don't know what their role is and they're not being brought in properly. And if I look at things that have gone wrong and things that have gone right, there's a strong correlation with getting that middle management layer
Yeah.
working really effectively
In the
and
way that it needs to. Yeah.
in the way that it
And
needs
not
to.
just being padding so that you can have some peace. And so
No,
you don't hear the voices below, but actually the opposite. So things that come up are the right things and that they can be organized faster.
yes, and if when you get it wrong, what happens is that when the middle managers hear things going wrong from their teams, they then shrug their shoulders and say, "Yeah, it's awful. What can we do?"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's bad news. Oh,
and when you've got needs, they need to do their piece of leadership
yeah.
within that, and then you've got to listen to them. And it's very easy not to because you're all too busy.
Yeah.
Um,
It is. Yeah.
and I try and
Yeah.
spend a lot. I mean, I have one-on-ones with members of my team, and I spend a lot of them um, talking about things that are happening that are not relevant to them. Because one of the or don't appear to be relevant to them
Yeah.
because um, people when it comes to communication, senior managers often I think fall into the trap of communicating what they think people need to know and will be interested in.
Mhm.
And in fact, what people need to know and are interested in is much broader than that. So I tell them everything. So they
Yeah.
feel passing. And every now and then, one of them says, "I'm glad I knew that,"
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah. I
that's
get that.
or now I've got the context. Now I understand. So now if I'm now in a discussion with someone else, another part of the organization, I can explain to them.
I get that.
The context of, and again, it comes down to having a singular focus, and the organization knows what it's doing and why.
Yeah. Michael, amazing. Really great insight and wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, you're very welcome.
You've been listening to the Lab to Market Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Deep Tech Leaders. This podcast has been produced by Bauhaus. You can find out more about us on LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.